The house had been empty for 3 years when James Mercer bought it. He knew this going in. The realtor had told him. The neighbors had told him. The price had told him. 40% below market value for a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street in a good school district is the kind of number that tells its own story without needing words. James was 43 years old, divorced, 2 kids who spent alternating weeks with him, an architect who had spent 20 years designing other people's homes and had decided, finally, that it was time to design his own. He was not, he told himself, a superstitious man. He bought the house. He moved in on a Saturday in April. He began noticing things on Sunday. The first thing was the smell. Not unpleasant. Not the smell of a house that has been closed up and neglected. Something more specific than that. Familiar, in a way he couldn't place. A smell that reminded him of something he couldn't quite identify. Something from a long time ago, from a place he no longer went, from a version of his life that had ended before he was ready for it to end. He assumed it was the house settling into new occupation. Old houses absorb the lives lived in them and release those lives slowly, over time, when the air shifts. He told himself this and mostly believed it. The second thing was the window. In the upstairs hallway there was a window that faced the backyard. A standard window, double-paned, with a latch that James had checked on his walkthrough. Locked. On his 3rd morning in the house, he woke to find it open. Not forced, not broken, simply open. The latch turned, the window raised 4 inches, the curtain moving in the morning air. He closed it. He checked the latch. It was functional. He told himself he must have opened it himself, at some point in the night without remembering. He told himself, this happened. People did things in their sleep. He locked the window. The following morning, it was open again. James had bought the house, knowing its history in the broad strokes. He had not looked into the specifics. In his experience, every old house had a history, and the history was rarely something you wanted to know in detail before you moved in. But after the window, he looked. The house at 14 Alderton Lane had last been occupied by a woman named Catherine Marsh. She had lived there alone for 11 years, following her divorce from a man named Gerald Marsh. She had died in the house in January 3 years ago. She was 58 years old. The cause of death was listed as natural, cardiac arrest. She had been found by her neighbor, a woman named Phyllis, who had come to check on her after not seeing her for 4 days. The estate had been tied up in a dispute between Catherine's 2 adult children for over 2 years before the house was finally listed for sale. James read all of this. He noted it. He moved on. He did not at that point look into what had happened in the house before Catherine Marsh. He would later wish he had. His daughter Emma was 11 years old. She spent the first alternating week in the new house in late April and established her preferences immediately and thoroughly. She wanted the room at the end of the hallway. She wanted to paint it green. She wanted a desk by the window that looked out at the backyard. James said yes to all of it. On the 3rd night of Emma's first week, she came into James's room at 2 a.m. He woke to find her standing at the foot of his bed, not crying, not frightened exactly. Thoughtful in the way that Emma was thoughtful. as if she had worked through the first several stages of a problem and arrived at a question she needed help with. She said, "Dad, who is the woman who stands in the backyard?" James sat up. He said, "What?" Emma said, "The woman in the backyard. I can see her from my window sometimes. At night, she just stands there." James got up. He went to Emma's room. He looked out the window at the backyard. The backyard was empty, lit by the motion sensor light he had installed the previous weekend, triggered now by their presence at the window. He said, "There's no one there, Em." Emma looked at the yard for a moment. Then she said, "She was there before. She was just standing by the tree." James said, "You were probably dreaming." Emma said, "I wasn't asleep yet." He installed a security camera in the backyard the following day. He told himself it was a sensible precaution for any homeowner. He told himself it had nothing to do with what Emma had said. He reviewed the footage every morning for 2 weeks. For the first 11 days, the footage showed an empty backyard. Occasionally, a raccoon. Once, a cat from 3 doors down that apparently considered his yard part of its territory. On the 12th night, at 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. James watched the footage the following morning, coffee in hand, expecting another raccoon. He watched for 7 seconds before he set down his coffee. In the footage, at 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor light came on. The backyard was empty. The light had been triggered by nothing visible. James went back through the footage frame by frame. In the 3rd frame after the light activated, in the far corner of the yard near the oak tree, there was something. A shape. Indistinct. There for 3 frames and then gone. He told himself it was a compression artifact. He told himself digital footage did strange things at night. He told himself there were rational explanations. He also called his neighbor Phyllis. Phyllis Okafor was 74 years old and had lived next door to 14 Alderton Lane for 31 years. She had known Catherine Marsh. She had been the one to find her. She invited James in for tea with the particular efficiency of a woman who had been expecting someone to knock on her door for 3 years. She talked for 2 hours. She told him about Catherine Marsh. A quiet woman, she said. Private. Not unfriendly, but careful. The kind of careful that comes from having learned at some point that openness has a cost. She told him about Catherine's ex-husband, Gerald, whom she had met twice in the years when he still occasionally came to the house for one reason or another. She described him as a man she had instinctively disliked without being able to say precisely why. The kind of man who was always slightly too charming, who watched rooms rather than participating in them. And then she told James something he had not known. She told him that Catherine Marsh was not the first woman to die in that house. The woman's name was Helen Voss. She had lived at 14 Alderton Lane from 1987 to 1999. She had died in the house in March of 1999. She was 44 years old. The cause of death had been ruled accidental. She had fallen down the main staircase. She had been found at the bottom of the stairs by her husband, who had been away on a business trip, and had returned to find her there. Her husband's name was Gerald Marsh. Phyllis said he lived in this house with 2 women. Both of them died in it, and the second time the police came and looked and closed their files in 8 days, and that was that. James said, "Was there an investigation?" Phyllis said, "There was, but Gerald Marsh was very good at being very sad, and very good at having very clean hands." She poured more tea. She said, "I reported my concerns at the time to the police. They were noted. I was told that the circumstances were consistent with an accident and that there was no evidence to suggest otherwise." She said, "Catherine came to live here in 2001. Gerald had sold the house to her. She didn't know when she bought it who she was buying it from. She found out later, after they met, after they married, after she had already put down roots." She said, "She tried to leave him twice. Both times she came back. I don't know all the reasons. I knew some of them. And when she finally did leave, when the divorce finally went through in 2013, I thought she was safe." She looked at her hands. She said, "She was safe for 7 years." And then her heart stopped, and she was 58 years old and perfectly healthy, and her heart simply stopped. James said, "Where is Gerald Marsh now?" Phyllis said, "That is the question I have been asking myself for 3 years. James spent 2 weeks doing what he had not done before he bought the house. He researched Gerald Marsh. What he found was a man who had spent his life in the space between what could be proven and what could not. 2 wives dead in the same house. An ex-wife dead of causes that were technically natural. A civil lawsuit from 2005. Settled before trial. A restraining order filed in 2012, withdrawn before it was served." He also found something that Phyllis had not told him. Gerald Marsh had a 3rd wife. Her name was Sandra. They had married in 2017. They lived in a house in coastal Connecticut. Sandra Marsh was 52 years old. She was alive. James struggled with what to do with this information. He was not a police officer. He was not an investigator. He was an architect who had bought a house and found something in its history that had no clear path forward. He called a lawyer. The lawyer told him that his information, while troubling, did not constitute evidence of any crime. He called the Providence Police Department and asked to speak to someone about Helen Voss. He was told the case was closed. He was told he could file a request to have it reviewed. He was told this process took time. He filed the request. He also did something else. He found Sandra Marsh's email address through a professional network. He wrote her a message. He rewrote it 7 times. He kept it factual. He described what he had found. He attached the documents he had gathered. He said he had no way of knowing if she was aware of the history of the man she was married to. He said he thought she deserved to know. He sent it on a Tuesday evening. He did not expect a response. She responded on Thursday morning. The email was 3 sentences long. It said, "I know. I have known for 2 years. I am trying to find a way out that is safe." And then, "Thank you for telling me. You are the first person who has." What followed was 4 months of careful, methodical work involving James, Sandra, Phyllis, and a detective named Karen Holloway from the Connecticut State Police who had, it turned out, been building a file on Gerald Marsh for 18 months, following a tip from a domestic violence organization that Sandra had contacted quietly, once, and then been too afraid to follow up on. Sandra provided documents, financial records she had photographed without Gerald's knowledge, emails she had preserved, a journal she had kept for 2 years, documenting incidents she had been afraid to report. Phyllis provided her 31 years of first-hand observation, her original complaint from 1999, her documentation of Catherine Marsh's years in the house. James provided the research he had compiled, the timeline, the pattern. Karen Holloway, working with investigators in Rhode Island, built the case that neither the Providence police in 1999 nor anyone since had been able to fully construct. Because neither the Providence police in 1999 nor anyone since had had all 3 pieces in the same place at the same time.
Gerald Marsh was arrested on a Friday morning in October.
He was charged with the murder of Helen Voss, with the suspected murder of Catherine Marsh pending the results of an exhumation and re-examination ordered by the court, with multiple counts of domestic abuse. He was denied bail. He sat in the courtroom with the expression of a man who has spent a long time been very good at appearing to be something he was not, and who has discovered that the performance has finally, irrevocably, ended. Sandra Marsh filed for divorce from prison. She moved to a different state. She started over. She sends James a message on the anniversary of Gerald's arrest every year. Just 2 words. Thank you. Phyllis Okafor still lives next door to 14 Alderton Lane. She came to James's door the morning after Gerald Marsh's arrest with a bottle of wine and a look on her face that he described afterward as the particular expression of someone who has waited 30 years for something and has finally, at the age of 74, seen it arrive. She sat at his kitchen table, and they drank the wine, and she told him stories about Helen Voss, not the story of how she died, the story of how she lived, the woman she had been, the laugh she had, the garden she had kept in the backyard, before Gerald Marsh had let it go to ruin. James listened, and when Phyllis left, he stood at the back door and looked out at the backyard. He thought about Helen Voss, who had tended a garden where there was now an oak tree and dead grass and a security camera that had once captured something it couldn't quite explain at 3:17 in the morning. He thought about what it meant to die in a house and have it matter to no one outside of a neighbor next door who filed a complaint that was noted and then set aside. He thought about Emma, who had seen a woman standing by the tree. He had never told Emma what he had found. She was 11 years old, and she did not need to carry this. But he thought about it, about the woman she had seen, about the specific spot by the oak tree. He did not know what to make of it. He did not try to explain it. Some things resist explanation. Some things simply are. He replanted the garden in the spring. He did not know what Helen Voss had grown there. He chose what seemed right. Lavender, rosemary. A climbing rose along the fence. Emma helped him on a Saturday afternoon. She dug the holes with a small spade and placed the plants with more care than he expected from an 11-year-old, and then stood back and looked at what they had done. She said, "It looks like someone used to grow things here." James said, "Someone did, a long time ago." Emma nodded. She seemed satisfied with this. She went inside. James stayed in the garden for a while. The light was going. The air smelled of turned earth and lavender and something else, something faint that he had been smelling since the first morning in this house. He finally knew what it reminded him of. It reminded him of his grandmother's house, of Saturday mornings when he was small, of a garden that someone had tended with love for a long time, of the particular smell of a place that has been cared for and is being cared for again. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.